My name is Elise Dawson. I'm 36 years old, a financial operations manager for a regional investment firm just outside Philadelphia. I pay my taxes early. I keep spare batteries in a labeled drawer, and I've never been late on rent, not even once. But none of that matters when you're standing in your childhood living room on Christmas morning, watching your parents give your younger sister the keys to a house and telling you, with smiling eyes, "You'll understand someday." The moment it happened, I didn't flinch. Not outwardly. I had trained for this. My entire life had been a quiet marathon of lowered expectations and unacknowledged milestones. I clapped when Sophie gasped at the silver ribbon, cooed when she found the key nestled inside the velvet box. I even smiled when Mom dabbed her eyes and whispered something about crown molding and a second-floor laundry. My father, Victor, stood by the fireplace with his usual deadpan pride, like the moment belonged to him as much as it did to her. Then he turned to me. No speech, no camera-ready smile, just a plain white envelope slipped into my lap like a utility bill. "Here you go," he said, already looking away. Inside, a job listing, admin assistant, entry-level, hourly, with a note in his stiff mechanical print. Thought this might be more your speed. It didn't even sting the way it used to, because I wasn't surprised. I was prepared. What they didn't know, and what I had been quietly building for months, was that this year I had brought my own kind of gift. Not wrapped, not sparkling, but real. And it was going to speak for itself. They didn't know it yet, but the script they'd rehearsed for decades, where Sophie shines and I politely shrink, was about to lose its lead, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment. Christmas morning had always belonged to them. This time, it would belong to me. I was 9 the first time I realized I was forgettable. It was my birthday, a Tuesday, and I had woken up early, so sure there would be balloons, or at least a card on the kitchen counter. But when I came downstairs, there was just burnt toast and the sound of my mom, Linda, humming while brushing Sophie's hair in the next room. Sophie had a mild cold, and Mom said she didn't want the kitchen smelling like cake batter. So I made cupcakes by myself. Box mix, too much oil, and one of the eggs cracked into the sink. No one said happy birthday until dinner time. And even then, it was Sophie who blew out my candle, giggling like she was doing me a favor. That year, she got a backyard pony party with glittery invitations. Mine was a paper plate with my name spelled wrong and icing. I told myself it would change, that when I got older, they'd see me. When I won the state science fair in 8th grade with a working hydroelectric dam model, Dad arrived 15 minutes late and left before the awards. "Big client meeting," he said. When I graduated high school with a full academic scholarship, Mom texted me, "So proud. Sorry we couldn't be there. Sophie had a dance showcase." It wasn't just the big things. It was the hundreds of small ones. The way they always introduced me as our practical one, while Sophie was our dreamer. The way every Christmas she got glitter and gold, and I got a calendar or a planner with some inspirational quote slapped on the front. They didn't forget me. Not really. They just made it clear I didn't need anything more. So I learned not to ask. I got a job at 16, paid for my own laptop when mine broke, figured out how FAFSA worked without help, and every time I did, I told myself it was a win. That being self-sufficient made me stronger. But strength without acknowledgement can rot into something else, something brittle. By the time I was 30, I'd mastered the art of being quiet, of watching from the back row, of sending cards and flowers and RSVPs without expecting much in return. I'd even stopped going home for holidays, claiming work or weather or some made-up conflict. The truth was simpler. I didn't want to be a prop in a show where I didn't have a line. But this Christmas, I had come. Not because I believed anything had changed, but because this time I had something to say. I just hadn't said it yet. That night, after Sophie went upstairs to FaceTime her boyfriend about the French doors, and my parents settled into their usual post-dinner ritual of reruns and decaf, I walked quietly through the hallway. The guest room, once my bedroom, still had my name carved into the underside of the desk. But everything else felt like it belonged to someone else. Even the air was different, like the house had learned to forget me too. I don't know what pulled me toward my father's office. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was muscle memory from the days when I used to sneak in just to feel what control smelled like. Old wood, printer ink, and lemon polish. The door was slightly ajar. That alone was unusual. Victor Dawson did not leave things unlocked. The safe was behind the cabinet. Always had been. Gray, dull, industrial, and open. I stared at it for a long time, long enough to feel my pulse in my fingertips. Then I knelt, slowly, carefully. Inside were manila folders, neatly labeled. Mortgage docs, tax returns, Sophie LLC, trust disbursement. The handwriting was unmistakably his. I flipped through them in silence, eyes scanning lines like they were braille made for the soul. And that's when I found it, a sealed envelope, plain white. On the front, to be opened upon death. My stomach turned, not from fear, but recognition. Something in me already knew this wasn't going to be about grief. I opened it. Inside was a will. Not the one I remembered. The one we all signed when Sophie turned 21, with her posing like it was a magazine shoot and me sitting off-center, holding the pen like a paperweight. This one was different. My name came first, and next to it, a parcel number, a property I'd never heard of. I turned the page. A deed, purchased 6 years ago, under my name. But then the signature. The way the L curled, the angle of the D in Dawson. It wasn't mine. I stared at it so long the edges blurred. Behind the deed was an authorization form, bank transactions, a trust account. The activity dated back years, using my social security number, my credit, my name. Someone had forged me. My breath went thin, shallow. The betrayal wasn't just personal now. It was financial, legal, systemic. They hadn't just ignored me. They had turned me into a tool, a signature to shuffle assets around like furniture in a showroom they never let me visit. I sat there, back against the file cabinet, hands ice cold on my lap, trying to stitch together what I already knew. It wasn't just favoritism. It was theft, not of money, of identity. And the part that gutted me most, how easy they must have believed it would be to keep me from ever finding out. I didn't confront them that night. I didn't storm in with the papers or shout accusations across the living room. That's never been how our family works. We didn't scream. We simmered. We didn't fight. We withheld. Instead, I closed the safe quietly, slid the door shut with the same kind of grace my mother would have used to arrange holiday napkins, and went back to bed. Or at least, I pretended to. I lay awake for hours, the glow of the hallway light flickering under the door like it was trying to spell something across the floorboards. The next morning, over pancakes and decaf, Mom asked me if I had found a real job yet. I nodded. Dad offered me a printout of another administrative assistant listing from some firm in town, as if that would somehow close the loop on my potential. Sophie launched into her latest podcast idea, something about intentional living and morning routines. I listened. I smiled. I did not speak. But as soon as I got back to my apartment, I called Lillian. We'd gone to college together. She went the law school route. I went numbers. She specialized in estate structures and fraud litigation now, and I trusted her in the way you trust people who have seen you at 2 a.m. with mascara tears and microwave popcorn. I didn't give her the full story, just the documents. Laid out in order, like evidence in a trial, I wasn't sure I was ready to begin. She called back 2 days later. "Elise," she said, her voice calm but edged, "if you wanted to pursue fraud, you'd have a case." I didn't want revenge. I didn't want prison. I wanted the truth to stop hiding. I wanted control. So we started digging. Over the following weeks, the paper trail unfolded like a slow-burning fire. The house purchased in my name existed, legally tied to my SSN. A small investment account had been opened and drained. And the lake house, my parents' prized legacy, had been quietly mortgaged 3 years ago to cover Sophie's failed skincare startup. The payments were inconsistent. The bank was circling. And that's when the idea came to me, not in a flash, but in the kind of slow clarity that comes only after long silence. If they could use my name without permission, I could reclaim it, with intention. So I did. With Lillian's help, I formed a shell LLC. I named it Elm Reach Holdings, something clean, forgettable. I hired a proxy to bid on the lake house when the auction notice came. No fanfare, no connection to Elise Dawson. Just quiet paperwork, clean legal channels, and a signature that finally belonged to me. And when the deed arrived, weeks later, I didn't smile. I just sat there, holding it like it weighed nothing and everything at once. Because for the first time in my life, I owned something they wanted. Christmas came again, predictable as ever. Same wreath on the Dawson front door. Same cinnamon sugar candles burning just a little too strong. Same ceramic snowman mugs, chipped but displayed like heirlooms. I arrived with a small white box tucked under my coat. No ribbon, no tag, no sparkle, just a box. Sophie was already there, glowing in her new beige cashmere set, like she was waiting for someone to paint her. Mom was humming along to off-key carols, and Dad stood by the fireplace with that mug he'd had for 20 years, black, chipped, and always filled with the same lukewarm coffee. The rituals unfolded like a play I knew by heart. Sophie opened a new leather handbag, gasped on cue. Mom teared up. Dad gave a one-word nod. Nice. Then came the toast. To new chapters and dream homes. I raised my cup of black coffee and said nothing. And then it was my turn. I reached under the tree and handed Dad the white box. He took it with a smirk, probably assuming it was socks or a monogrammed mug. Sophie leaned in, eyebrows arched. Mom tilted her head like she already pitied the effort. Dad opened the lid. Inside was an envelope sealed with a dark red wax stamp. Lillian's idea. Dramatic, but effective. He cracked the seal with one thumb and unfolded the contents. The first page was the deed. My name. The property? The lake house. At first, he didn't react. Just blinked, slowly, like his brain had lagged behind his hands. Then came the second page. A copy of the forged authorization, clearly annotated, with a letter from my attorney outlining the timeline of misuse. His fingers started to tremble. Mom leaned over his shoulder, still smiling until she saw the header. The words legal breach hit her like cold water. Her face fell. She looked at me, mouth parting to speak, but no sound came. Elise, she finally said, voice cracking like thin ice. What is this? I looked her in the eyes. Calm, steady. It's exactly what it looks like. She turned to Dad. You didn't tell me. It wasn't a question. And he didn't answer. Sophie clutched her new handbag tighter, glancing between the three of us like she'd just walked into the middle of a movie she'd missed the first half of. She looked confused, unprepared. For once, she had no script, and that told me everything. The silence in the room thickened, like syrup poured over carpet, dense, uncleanable. I stood slowly, smoothing the hem of my sweater. I won't be sharing the lake house, I said lightly, like I was declining an extra roll at dinner. Not this time. No one spoke. Dad stared at the papers in his hands, reading them again as if the words might change. Mom took a single step back, putting physical space between her and the truth. And Sophie just blinked, her expression frozen somewhere between confusion and the realization that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one that mattered anymore. And me? I didn't feel triumphant. There was no thrill in that moment, only stillness. Because I wasn't there for applause. I wasn't there for drama. I was there to hand the story back to them. Every silent dismissal, every diminished birthday, every false smile and forged signature. Tied up in one envelope. Merry Christmas. I didn't linger. There was no dramatic pause, no last-minute plea. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair, slid it on slowly, and turned toward the door. As I reached for the handle, I glanced back, not out of sentiment, but acknowledgement. Dad was still seated, clutching the papers like they might vanish if he looked away. Mom stood behind him, her face sagging under the weight of too many unsaid things, and Sophie, she was still hugging that purse like a shield, waiting for someone to tell her what just happened. I didn't offer clarity. I didn't owe them that. Just so we're clear, I said softly, I'm not giving it back. Not the house, not my name, not anymore. Then I opened the door and let the cold rush in behind me. The December air slapped my face like truth. Sharp, honest, unfiltered. It didn't sting. It steadied me. I drove north in silence. No music, no podcasts, just the sound of tires against snow-dusted asphalt and my own breath evening out in time with the road. By dusk, I was home. My home. The lake house. Mine in name, in law, and finally, in spirit. I lit a fire, let it crackle into the quiet, wrapped myself in a thick blanket, and watched the snow fall like something sacred. The kind of silence that didn't ache, didn't judge. It just was. No one called that night, and for once, I didn't wonder if they would, because peace, I was learning, doesn't need an audience. It just needs space. And after a lifetime of shrinking, I had finally claimed mine. The snow kept falling steadily, gently blanketing the world outside my lake house in layers of quiet white. I sat curled up by the window, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, fingers cradling a mug of coffee that had long since cooled. The fire crackled softly behind me, casting a warm glow over the old hardwood floors and faded rugs. The house wasn't perfect. The upstairs sink still leaked. The heating system protested before finally warming up, and the floorboards creaked softly underfoot, like whispers of its past. But for the first time, every imperfection was fully mine. My family had always communicated in silence. It was how we dealt with everything we preferred not to acknowledge. Sophie's smallest successes, a bit role in a commercial, another influencer partnership, a podcast episode, were celebrated with parties, toasts, and enthusiasm. For me, recognition was sparse, practical, and measured out quietly. They never shouted at me or openly criticized me. Instead, they gently handed me less until I learned to ask for nothing at all. At first, I mistook that silence for strength, believing my ability to need less was an asset. But silence isn't merely an absence of noise. It's cumulative. Over the years, their neglect became heavy, shaping me in ways I couldn't see clearly until I finally broke free. Now, the silence I felt around me was different. Tonight, it belonged entirely to me. It wasn't forced upon me. It was chosen, deliberate, empowering. I hadn't taken the lake house out of anger or even revenge. I reclaimed it to restore something far deeper, my right to occupy my own space fully, without apology or explanation. I did it because I was tired of quietly shrinking to accommodate the narrative they'd created for me. Maybe my mother would eventually reach out, her voice gentle, cautiously offering apologies wrapped in half-truths. Perhaps my father would forward another impersonal job listing, sidestepping our new reality as if nothing significant had occurred. Sophie might send a meme or a casual joke, neatly avoiding the discomfort of acknowledging what she'd always known but refused to admit. Or perhaps they'd remain silent altogether. For the first time, it didn't matter to me what path they chose. I'd finally stopped waiting for recognition from people who had carefully built their lives around refusing to see me. Tonight wasn't about convincing them to change. It was about changing the way I saw myself. Outside, the snow intensified, gently covering the trees and softening the harsh edges of the frozen lake. The quiet that filled the room no longer felt heavy or oppressive. It felt peaceful and comforting, a silence chosen deliberately rather than endured passively. I thought of the girl who baked her own cupcakes alone on forgotten birthdays, quietly hoping someone would remember her. I thought of the teenager scanning crowded auditoriums, searching desperately for familiar faces that never appeared. And I remembered the woman who received a dismissive job listing, handed casually like a reminder that ambition was something meant only for others. But tonight, that silence had changed. It no longer diminished me. It liberated me. I wasn't angry or bitter. I was simply done making myself small. Breathing deeply, I felt a profound sense of release, like finally exhaling after years spent holding my breath. The silence around me was no longer their tool. It had become my strength. As I sat in a space reclaimed from neglect and quiet dismissal, I realized something essential. Some things don't require anyone else's permission to own. I wouldn't be giving it back. Not the lake house, not my voice, not my name, not anymore.